Banshee Season 3, Episode 7, You Can't Hide from the Dead review. Hood and the gang finally pulled off the heist in this episode, but it didn't go off exactly the way they planned it. Carrie and Gordon are back together, and Hood has officially lost his mind over the death of Shaban. Also, Chaitin is alive and still on the run. Let's get into my review. So it starts off with Hood at Shaban's trailer home, looking through all the police files on Chaitin. Then he falls asleep and dreams about Shaban and him laying in bed together and reliving her death, but then he wakes up. At the same time, Chaitin wakes up in a barn, bloody from his bullet wounds. He begins to hallucinate and sees Shaban staring at him face to face, and he lets out a horrifying scream. Later, the woman who lives on the farm walks in and Chaitin grabs her from behind, covers her mouth and tells her if she screams he will kill her. But then Chaitin passes out. The woman ends up helping him instead of calling the cops. She bandages his wounds and gives him some food. Later that night, one of the neighbors shows up and Chaitin stabs him to death with a pitchfork. And Chaitin ends up killing the woman and takes her truck and leaves. Then one of my favorite scenes is when Hood is training by punching trees with his bare knuckles and stabbing trees with his knife. He is interrupted by who he thinks is Shaban behind him, but really it's Amy, and he is not happy to see her. She tells him she can find Chaitin and apologizes for not killing him when she had the chance. Later, Job shows up and tells Hood Captain Farillo of the FBI is still after him, but Hood only cares about the heist. Job wants to call it off because he saw a crazy side of Hood that he never saw before, and he might get everyone killed. But Hood says, remember when you asked me what I needed? Well, this is it. So the heist is back on. We then catch up with Deva, who is still with Charlie at his house party. Everyone is gathered around watching Charlie and his friend fight each other. Already battered and bruised, they pull out long taser rods and start tasing each other. Charlie wins the brutal fight, and Deva looks turned on by it. Later, Carrie and Gordon show up to the party, and they are pissed and want to take Deva home, but she won't go without a fight. A bunch of guys jump Carrie, but she takes them all on, while Gordon goes toe-to-toe with Charlie. Carrie is beating the crap out of them and tasers one of the guys in the balls. Gordon holds his own, but Charlie pulls out a pistol and threatens to shoot him, but Gordon isn't afraid and dares Charlie to pull the trigger. Gordon snatches the gun away, and both him and Carrie leave with Deva. So it looks like Carrie and Gordon are back together, because later that night, they end up having sex. Later you see Rebecca, who has gone behind Proctor's back and meets up with a drug dealer named Hector. And they cut a deal that will most likely piss off Proctor, who is on a date with Emily, Brock's ex-wife. Now let's get into the heist. Each character had a tiny camera mounted on their head, and the whole thing was shot through point-of-view surveillance footage. It gave the feeling of you actually being there on the heist with them. So they used the underground tunnels to get into the camp. Then Job uses Colonel Stow's handprint and voice recording to get inside. Carrie starts drilling through the large safe. Suddenly Job is attacked by Captain Murphy and they start fighting. He calls for Hood to come help, but Hood starts to hallucinate again and sees Shaban. He freaks out and follows her throughout the hallways. Carrie cracks the safe open and Hood finally snaps out of it and comes to Job's rescue. They all pack up the money, but Colonel Stowe shows up and the gang makes a run for it back down the tunnels, and a huge shootout erupts. This was another of my favorite scenes, when Stowe catches up with Hood and they start fighting. Stowe is getting the upper hand, so Hood grabs a shotgun and shoots him point blank range 3 times in the chest. Then Hood sets some explosive charges, but Stowe is wearing a bulletproof vest and gets back up and attacks Hood. Carrie blows the tunnel, and Hood makes it back to the truck, but just like Michael Myers, Stowe is still alive and grabs Hood by the leg. Stowe gets inside the truck and beats the crap out of everyone. Finally, after a few minutes of Stowe manhandling them, Job manages to kick Stowe out the truck. He fires at the truck as they drive off. They barely got away. It ends with Amy telling Hood where he can find Chaitin, in the back swamps of Louisiana in a tribal outcast group named the 18th Ward. Amy says Chain is a stone-cold killer who needs to be put down. So Hood and Brock team up together and go after Chain. That was my review of episode 7, You Can't Hide from the Dead. I give it a rating of a 9.5 out of 10. Let me know in the comments what your favorite part was. I'm really excited for next week's episode when we get to see Hood vs. Chain. I got my money on Hood, but you never know what will happen in this show.